now hand over to your presenter, Dana, and she's the solicitor in charge of the consumer team at Legal Aid. Thank you, Dana.
Thanks, Melanie, and thanks for that introduction. Hi, everybody, and thank you for spending your time with us this afternoon. I'd also like to acknowledge that I am talking to you today from Gadigal land and pay my respect to elders past, present, and acknowledge any Aboriginal people who are on the webinar today. So today I'd like to cover 5 main points. So I'd like to talk to you about the Scams Prevention Framework Act. You might have seen some news about that earlier this year and wondered what that means for your clients. I'd like to talk to you about what we know so far about how the Act can protect our clients, and then give you some practical steps about things that you can look out for your clients, what information you can give to them, and some referral points in terms of where to get help. And as Mel said, there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end. So the Scam Prevention Framework Act. So in February this year, the Australian Parliament passed the Scams Prevention Framework Bill. And this amends the main consumer protection laws, the Competition and Consumer Act, and introduces new obligations for certain businesses around scams. Initially, the framework will be in respect of 3 main industries. That's the telecommunications industry, the digital platforms industry, so think Meta, Facebook, WhatsApp, Amazon, and also the banks. So those are the 3 main sectors that the Act is going to regulate to start with. Also, there is a designated place for complaints to be escalated to under the Act. So there's an external dispute resolution forum. This external dispute resolution forum will be the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, also known as the Financial Ombudsman, which is already processing financial services complaints, and this will be an extension of its jurisdiction. So the implementation of this framework is going to mark a big change in how dispute resolution happens with scam matters. Already there's some things that people can do when they've been scammed, but the Scams Prevention Framework is going to take those rights and processes even further. There'll be obligations on businesses to prevent scams through proactive measures, to detect suspicious activity and report scams to regulators and affected consumers. There'll also be obligations to disrupt scam operations and respond effectively to scam incidents. So it's not just about individual consumer disputes. This framework is looking at changing things at a systems level to try to make Australia a safer place for consumers. There will be 3 regulators that are overseeing the Scams Prevention Framework. So these regulators are ASIC, which is the corporate watchdog, the regulator for the banks, the ACMA, which is the Australian Communications Media Authority, which is responsible for regulating the telcos, and then the ACCC will be the regulator for digital platforms. And overall, the ACCC will be the regulator for the Scams Prevention Framework. It's a really exciting time. As I understand it, Australia is one of the first jurisdictions in the world to take a whole of ecosystem approach to scams prevention and response. So the next step in terms of getting some of these concepts into practical processes is for the telco, digital platforms and banking industries to develop codes of practice that will set out their obligations and liabilities in respect of consumers and what consumers can expect when they make a complaint to their bank, telco or digital platform about a scam. So Treasury is consulting at the moment about those codes of practice, and hopefully over the next year or so we'll be able to know more about what those obligations will be for businesses in respect of consumer protection. So we might think about doing an update of this webinar at that point when we have more information about the codes of practice. So this is a little summary of what I was saying. So we've got the scams prevention framework rules, the mandatory sector codes, and then the multiple regulator regime. And all of the regulators are going to be sharing intelligence about scams with each other to try to disrupt as many scams as possible and keep Australian consumers as safe as possible. So Mel, if we just move to the next slide. The next slide these are the 4 points that I'm going to talk about over the next few slides. So I want to talk to you about the kind of red flags that you can look for when you're talking to your clients or your clients are raising issues relating to scams. So talk to you about the kind of common scams that we see and things to look out for. I'd like to talk to you as well about how to report scams, so information you can give your clients about scams that what they can do once they have been scammed, and then how your clients can navigate the dispute resolution process where they're hoping to get some money back as a result of the scam. And then I wanted to share with you a case study. So one of the outcomes in AFCA, so the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, in respect of a victim of a scam. So that's what we'll be going through over the next 10 minutes or so. So to start with, so educating your clients on scams. Mel, if we move to the next slide, there are a handful of the most common types of scams on this slide, and no doubt you are aware of most of them. But with agentic AI, scams are constantly evolving and innovating. And so while these are common categories of scams, it's difficult to know, what a scam is going to look like in the future. All of these scams involve an element of trickery or deception by someone who's not known to the victim. And all of the scams involve leveraging that trickery or deception to get the victim to send money to the scammer, often through a bank. At Legal Aid, we've seen examples of all of these scams. Recently, we've been assisting a person who's transferred hundreds of thousands of dollars to a scammer that was pretending to be a love interest in the context of a romance scam. I've also seen business email compromise scams. So the one I've seen most recently was a couple bought a house and needed to transfer a certain amount of money to their lawyer's trust account to complete the sale. But unfortunately, their lawyer's email was compromised, and a scammer sent an email to the couple from the lawyer's email account. So it looked legitimate, but in fact, it had fake trust account details in it. And that means that the couple unfortunately transferred hundreds of thousands of dollars to this fake scammer's account when they thought that they were transferring it to their lawyer's trust account. So the scams can be quite sophisticated and the impact can be devastating for our clients. Investment scams often prey on people who are experiencing financial hardship or another kind of vulnerability. And a common feature is that there's a trusted person in the victim's life who is advocating for the scam and saying, yeah, I've done this investment in the past. It's given me good returns. And so it gives some legitimacy to the scam, and a person in their vulnerable situation of financial hardship or other circumstances puts money into the investment scam. And the scammer often says to release money as part of this investment scam, you need to put in more money. And that can escalate over a couple of days, and suddenly the person has transferred hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars into this investment scam platform and feels pot committed. The psychology with scams and the kind of careful manipulation of scammers is another key part of why these scams are successful. And I'll go into detail, like I said, a little later about a case study that was before AFCA, which will explain the victim's experience of a scam in a little bit more detail. So just moving on to the next slide. So the next slide is about reporting scams. So say your client has raised some of these issues with you. What might your client do next? So firstly, like importantly, as soon as someone realizes that they've been scammed, they should contact their bank immediately to report the scam and to try to prevent any further losses. If you're not satisfied with your bank's response, you can ask to make a complaint in the form of an internal dispute resolution review to the bank. So the bank's made a decision in one department. If you say, I'd like to make an internal dispute resolution review of your decision, it goes to a separate team to look with fresh eyes at the bank's decision. And then they share their decision with you. And then if you're still not satisfied with the bank's response about the scam, then you could consider making a complaint to AFCA. And in a couple of minutes, I'll talk to you a little bit more about AFCA, their approach with scams, and a little bit about the process of making a complaint. So the second step that your client could take is more of a system step rather than a step that's going to get an individual outcome. So they might choose to make this report to the ACCC National Anti-Scam Scam Watch Centre once the heat has gone out of the discovery about the scam, when they have a little bit more breathing space, because making a complaint to the ACCC Scam Watch is going to improve the ACCC's intelligence about scams so that they can have an overall preventative strategy about scams. It's not going to get an individual outcome for your client. But it is important to do because it's a way to share data with the ACCC so that they can try to increase consumer awareness about scams and also talk to businesses about how they can improve their processes. And keeping in mind for New South Wales-based victims that Law Access is an excellent source of information and advice. And I'll talk in a little more detail about that later on. So this slide is about dispute resolution. So where you've not been able to resolve a complaint with the bank says, no, we're not going to refund any money that you've lost through the scam. The next step after you've raised a complaint with the bank is to go to the Australian Financial Complaints Authority. And AFCA is the financial services dispute resolution body. So you make a complaint to AFCA if you have a problem with your bank or your insurer or your superannuation fund. It's the place you go to for complaints about financial services. And if you want to complain about how your bank has managed your scam complaint, then this is the place that you go to. So AFCA is currently making decisions on scam complaints. Last financial year, AFCA received nearly 6,000 scam complaints. 2% of those were from people from a First Nations background, and a majority of the complaints were from New South Wales and Victoria. Many of the complainants who were making a complaint about scams also identified as having mental health conditions, including depression and anxiety as a result of the scam. And I think that really speaks to the psychological toll and shame that scams can cause. So AFCA, when they consider a complaint, they consider legal principles, industry codes and guidance, good industry practice, previous AFCA decisions, and each complaint is assessed individually based on what's fair in all the circumstances. So there's a variety of things that AFCA takes into account when considering a complaint. It's not a court of law. It's not bound by the usual processes and procedures of a court. It's free for consumers to make a complaint, and mostly a complaint is done through email exchange or phone conversation with the case managers. And if the matter can't be resolved through discussion with the case managers and the bank, then an ombudsman will make a decision. So the ombudsman is kind of like a judge in a way, they're the ultimate decision maker. And if the consumer, the complainant, accepts the decision that the Ombudsman makes, then it's binding on the business as well. So the initial question that AFCA asks in all scam complaints is whether the transactions were either authorised by the consumer or not authorised. So if they were authorised, was the transaction made with the account holder's knowledge or consent, or unauthorised, where it was made without the account holder's knowledge and consent. Where a transaction was performed by the customer, so it was authorised, the bank's primary duty is to follow the instructions of their customer. But there are some situations where the bank will be expected to make further inquiries. So in the context of a scam, if there was information that was provided from the consumer to the bank that should have put the bank on notice that there was something fishy going on, that there were some red flags, the story didn't add up, then there might be an obligation there for the bank to make further inquiries with the consumer. For example, saying, are you sure you've checked these numbers? Have you called your lawyer to speak with someone to confirm that the trust account details are accurate? You know, have you spoken with the person that you're transferring the money to in respect of this, you know, love interest or romance scam? So those kinds of questions might be appropriate where there's some information that the bank has, that there's maybe some red flags. And generally, scam awareness for businesses has really increased. Businesses have a lot of information on their websites for their customers about things to be aware of when in terms of scams. And so it's we can say that there's that duty for businesses to make those inquiries where they have that internal knowledge about scams and are building that internal knowledge about scams. So I mentioned authorized transactions. There's also unauthorized transactions. So where a person didn't know at all that there had been a transfer that had been made. They weren't in a situation of trickery where they were making the authorized transaction. And in that case, the e-payments code applies. And so it's a good idea because these concepts can be a bit complex and tricky. It's a good idea to speak to Law Access to get some more legal information or maybe some advice from a legal aid lawyer. So the next slide is talking about AFCA's receiving bank jurisdiction. So under AFCA's rules currently, AFCA is unable to consider complaints lodged by a consumer against a receiving bank. So what do I mean by receiving bank? So say I've been scammed and I make a decision with my Bank A, which is my bank that I'm a customer of. I've told Bank A to transfer some money to Bank B as part of the scam. So I have a relationship as a customer with Bank A, so I can make a complaint to AFCA about the way Bank A has managed my scam. But I've sent the money from Bank A to Bank B. I don't have a consumer relationship with Bank B. And so as a result, I'm currently not able to make a complaint to AFCA about the actions of Bank B in respect of how they managed the scam and whether they did enough to prevent my loss. However, that is excitingly changing. So in March 2026, AFCA will then be able to consider disputes not just against the sending bank, so Bank A in my example, but also against the receiving bank, Bank B in my example. And this is an expansion of protections for consumers. It means that we will have two businesses that will be able to try to hold to account through the AFCA process. And AFCA is still working through what this change in jurisdiction will mean in practice and how it will operate. And the plan is for AFCA to issue some guidance, probably in the form of a fact sheet or an approach paper prior to the commencement of the new jurisdiction in March 2026. So again, if that is that, that could be a point that you mention to your clients if they are planning to get some further legal advice. They could consider, do they have a claim against the sending bank and the receiving bank? The next slide is the case study that I was foreshadowing before. So in this particular matter, Louise was the victim of a HSBC impersonation scam. And you might have heard about this scam in the news over the past couple of years. Last year, ASIC announced that it was suing HSBC in the federal court on the grounds that HSBC failed to have adequate controls in place to prevent and detect unauthorized payments. Between January 2020 and August 2024, HSBC received approximately 950 reports of unauthorized transactions, which resulted in losses of about $23 million for their consumers, for their customers. Almost $16 million of those losses occurred in the 6-month period from October 23 to March 24. And Louise was one of those victims. Louise brought her case to AFCA because she wasn't happy with the bank's response to her request for a refund of the money she'd lost. In terms of what had happened to Louise and how the scam operated, Louise received a spoofed SMS from the bank, which referred to an attempted transaction from her bank account. And the SMS had a 1300 number for Louise to call to take some step of action so that she didn't lose that money. So thinking that she was talking to her bank, Louise called the 1300 number, was prompted to disclose her passcode so that they could do the multi-factor authentication, and transferred nearly $50,000. There was a transfer of nearly $50,000 that was made from Louise's bank account. In Louise's case, AFCA found that the bank should reimburse her for nearly $47,000. And the relevant considerations there was thinking about the environment that the scammer created. It was a high pressure environment where Louise felt that if she didn't act immediately, she would lose all of her funds. And so in that situation, her free will and choice were overborne by the scammer. And as I was saying before, there were a number of points where HSBC had received numerous reports about unauthorized transactions over a concentrated period of time, and didn't take the relevant steps to respond and protect consumers. So it will be interesting to see the outcome of ASIC's federal court case against HSBC on those issues. So the next slide has some points about where you can find help. So we spent some time talking about the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, AFCA. I want to talk a bit now about legal aid and community legal centres as a good place to get more information. So legal aid is a great place to get some help and advice about a scam. So if your client's based in New South Wales or living in New South Wales at the time they were scammed, they can contact Law Access New South Wales for some free legal information from one of our legal information officers about what to do next where they've been scammed. And that your client might also be offered a free appointment with one of our lawyers, either at the local legal aid office or by phone. And we also provide representation services for victims of scams who meet certain eligibility criteria. So this is a recent change for our advice intake and triage. So we'd really like to encourage referrals to our service so that we can provide some advice and support to the community about scams. Your client can also contact their local community legal centre. So for other states, your local community legal centre or your local legal aid could be a good option. But for New South Wales, I recommend coming through for some information to start with from Law Access New South Wales. So I think we are moving on to questions now, Mel.
Yes, I'll just check the questions that have come in. Okay, doesn't look like there are too many. One of the questions I had was that in AFCA, the normal rules of evidence and all of that don't apply. So does that mean that you can really do provide whatever evidence or whatever information you can to AFCA to
Yeah,
help your case?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I can talk a little bit more about the process of making a complaint and what to expect at AFCA. So, the usual way of making a complaint is through AFCA's online complaint form, which can be found on their website. But AFCA will also take complaints by phone or by post to be as accessible as possible. You can make your complaint by yourself. You don't need a lawyer, but if you would like a representative, then there's an opportunity in the form to select who you would like to be your representative. And then the complaint form basically gives you the opportunity to explain briefly what's happened and what you think would be a fair resolution in the circumstances. Once you do that complaint form, it'll go to the intake, registration and referrals team at AFCA, and they will let the business know that you've complained against, that there's been a complaint in AFCA, and they'll encourage the business to reach out to you over a 30-day period to try to resolve the matter directly. If the matter hasn't been resolved, then it will go further in the AFCA process and you'll be allocated a case manager. The case manager will then have a look at the information that's already on the file in your complaint form and will write to you and say, this is my understanding of the dispute. Here are some further questions that I'd like you to answer. And so your evidence to get to your question, Mel, can be in the form of writing to AFCA or talking to AFCA in response to the information that they want. They're really trying to tease out what's happened here so that they can make that assessment against the law, their previous decision, industry codes of practice, and what's fair in all the circumstances. So it might be, your recollection of what happened. It might be your bank statements, screenshots of conversations with scammers, CCTV footage if you went into the bank in person to show what happened at the bank, requesting telephone conversation recordings from the bank when you were instructing the bank, for example, to make the transfer in the context of the scam. Those are some common pieces of evidence that you might provide.
That's
Sorry, just
great.
lights are going up.
Thank you, Dana. We do have a few questions now that have come through. I've just asked them in the order that they came in. From Jane Liu, what can community workers do to support our clients?
Yeah, I think that so making sure that it's part of your discussions to triage for some of these issues. Like I was saying before, there's a huge psychological element to being scammed and a lot of shame. So creating a safe space for your clients to talk to you about what's going on in terms of, say, their financial hardship, might have been made worse by a scam, or if there's something on their mind, related to a scam. So making sure that it's a safe place for them to open up to you and being reassuring that there are places that people can go to for specialized advice and help. And also just reiterating the importance of contacting your bank as soon as possible so that the bank knows that you've been scammed to try to prevent any further losses.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks, Dana. Harriet has asked, given AFCA are funded by the banks, how is the perception of bias addressed?
So as a consumer lawyer, so I've been practicing in consumer law for over 10 years now. My experience is that AFCA, one of their key mandates, like other ombudsman schemes, is to be independent. There is a body of ombudsman schemes across Australia and New Zealand, which has a number of criteria for the ombudsman schemes to meet, and independence is crucial. So the ombudsmans and their staff have to act with the utmost independence and consider what's fair in the circumstances. They also all have boards, which have the ombudsman schemes have boards, many of which have consumer representatives, industry representatives, and independent representatives on the board. So there's that extra layer of governance where you do have the varied perspectives from industry, consumer, and independent board members to ensure that that independence is being upheld. So yeah, in my personal and professional experience of AFCA, I've always felt that there is that level of independence and striving to make decisions based on what's fair in the circumstances.
It's fantastic. Thanks, Dana. We're lucky to have you. Sarah Bowen has asked this. She said, "This has been great. Thank you." She did not know this new legislation was coming in. And Harriet has asked another question. Where do you send people if the loss is greater than AFCA's jurisdiction, i.e., more than approximately $1.2 million?
Yeah, that's right, Harriet. So AFCA does have limitations in terms of the monetary compensation. So if a consumer is seeking compensation above a certain threshold, which is quite a generous threshold, then the policy thinking behind having that threshold is for amounts of money that high, perhaps a court is a better place to ventilate the issues, rather than, as I said, AFCA is a more informal forum, not bound by the laws of the rules of evidence. It's mostly done in a remote context, by phone and by email. So where we're talking about such significant sums of money, court might be a more appropriate place to go. And if that is the case, and your client has losses of that amount, and I've seen it, that the romance scam that I was talking about before, the client has unfortunately transferred, well over $1 million overseas. It's important to get legal advice before taking any steps in the court against the bank. And as I said, you can do quite a lot of the dispute resolution process through the bank's processes. So by making that initial complaint, and then if you disagree with the complaint, going to the internal dispute resolution stage. And it is also possible if the consumer is willing to reduce what they're seeking to come within AFCA's reasonably generous limits and thresholds, then AFCA might also consider their dispute if the consumer is willing to lower the amount of money that they're seeking. That might not be possible in every situation, but it's an option.
Thank you, Dana. Jane has asked, do clients need to report to the local police station if they're a victim of a scam?
Yeah, they can report it if they're a victim of a scam. And I have seen matters where the police have investigated it and in fact apprehended the scammer. So they can do it. Generally, though, it can be very, very difficult to ever trace the scammer, and they might not be, often they're not residing in Australia. So yes, it can be something that consumers can do. But I've found the most effective ways to get individual outcomes is not to chase the scammer, but to make a complaint against the bank, and also to give information to the ACCC so they can improve their intelligence about the scams that are out there.
Thank you very much. Another from Harriet. Given the victim rarely has a contract with the receiving bank, what does legal aid think the likelihood of AFCA being able to make the receiving banks respond to their requests for information? Given even transferring banks now rarely provide fulsome or honest information to AFCA now, and in brackets, and they have a contract with the victim, close brackets, and AFCA can't force the banks to provide information.
Yeah, I think in my experience, banks and financial service providers generally respect the AFCA process and provide as much information as AFCA requires, because it's against bank's interests if they don't, because AFCA is making a decision based on all the information in front of them. And so if it's the case that the bank is not being responsive and providing all of the information, that could hurt their chances of winning in AFCA. So in my experience, I found that that banks have exchanged the relevant information. I think in the scams context, it's got that extra layer because on one hand, you want to provide all of the information so that we can have a transparent, open discussion about what's gone on the bank side and what's there for the consumer. But on the other hand, we're kind of balancing as well that commercial sensitivity and not wanting to release scams, processes, and procedures that the bank has, because then scammers might be able to manipulate those processes. So I think it is quite a careful balance, and I think AFCA is striking that well. In terms of the receiving banks, so yes, you're right, there has to be that change in jurisdiction for AFCA that's going to be coming through in March of next year, because currently AFCA's rules don't allow AFCA to consider a complaint where the consumer doesn't have a contract with the business. So this will be a step change, and again, one of those more innovative measures that Australia is taking to try to make sure that consumers are able to ventilate any issues that they have against all of the parties who might be involved in a scam.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dana. One more. Where does legal aid send victims for emotional support? The Scam Victim Alliance is a good place to send them for a support group.
Thank you. That's great to know, and I will look into that group. I haven't heard of that group. Yes, there are various not-for-profits, and also the ACCC has some resources around emotional support. You're right; it is key. Our service, like our skill set, is we're legally trained, so that's our skill set. But we do have social workers and financial counsellors and other allied professional services that work within legal aid, who can help support our clients. And also there are those external providers as well. So we do try to take a holistic view of the client's legal problem, and where we're not able to assist outside of that kind of legal arena, we look to make internal or external referrals.
Hmm. Thanks, Dana. One more anonymous question. Do chargeback rights still apply when a transaction was authorised by the cardholder? For example, where the person willingly made payment, but the merchant later turns out not to exist, and if not, can the consumer still take the matter to AFCA?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I haven't done a chargeback in a little while, and I know that the forms for chargeback applications vary depending on the bank. And so it could be a bit of a challenge, because what the bank literally has to do is retrieve that money that was sent. So I think I've seen chargebacks in situations where people have, incorrectly, so they've intended to send the money somewhere, but there's been some kind of issue in terms of the details that they've put in to send, or there's been an impact on like the service delivery. So say they've sent money to a merchant and the service hasn't been provided, or it hasn't been provided to an adequate standard. I've seen successful chargeback applications in those contexts. I'm not sure where, I haven't seen anything in terms of like where the merchant doesn't exist. So yeah, sorry if that's not a very satisfying answer, but I guess like in the upshot of what I'm saying is that it's worth having a look at the chargeback form for the bank, and I don't think it can hurt putting in the chargeback form.
Okay, thank you. They also asked, do the e-payments code, does the e-payments code only apply to unauthorized transactions, or could it cover cases where the consumer was deceived into authorizing the payment, e.g. through a scam? I think.
Yeah, it's a really it's quite a complex question,
Mm,
but I just give a couple of thoughts about it. So yes, you're right. The e-payments code applies for unauthorized transactions, but generally the application of the e-payments code has been very complex and ASIC is the regulator that manages the e-payments code, and it's often providing updated guidance about how to interpret the e-payments code. So if there's an e-payments code issue, I suggest getting legal advice. The second part of your question around what, is it voluntary in the context of deception and trickery? That's really what some of the HSBC decisions in AFCA have gone as far as to say, is that where a person's free will has been compromised, then as a result of the context of the scam, then you can't see those transactions as voluntary. You have to consider them as unauthorized. So that was quite a novel decision from AFCA. That was a really interesting decision as a consumer advocate to read.
Fantastic, Dana. Thank you so much for your time. There's two more questions from Harriet that I think we'll answer offline, Harriet, because we've run out of time. But I want to thank you so much, Dana. You have been absolutely amazing, and I have learnt a lot, and I'm excited that there's a better framework now for scams. Victims, and yeah, I can't thank you enough. So we will continue on. We just wanted to let you know that if you want to access legal advice, Law Access New South Wales is the first port of call for, and you can phone them on 1300 888 529. You can also get free legal information with our web chat, www.legalaid.nsw.gov.au, and our web chat is not AI, but real people. Law Access can triage you and find the right team for your client as well. We are the CLE team, and our resources are, we have many resources on the Legal Aid website. We have publications we can send to you. We have other webinars, we have podcasts and social media channels. Please get in touch, and you can get all of that through the Legal Aid New South Wales website. And if you want to organise an in-person or online CLE, that is community legal education for your team, please email clebranch@legalaid.newsouthwales.gov.au. Thank you very much for your time, and I will now end the webinar. Thank you. Thanks, Dana.